Okay. We are going live. I will get us started. Good evening, everyone. We'll get started here. If you'd like to take your seats. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Jasper Dent, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Just to note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam to your right, my left. I'd also like to take this moment to remind you all to silence your cell phones. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of Somerset Maugham and the Cinema by Robert Calder, published by University of Wisconsin Press. Thank you to Robert for being here tonight and for working with us to create this event. Robert Calder is an emeritus professor of English at the University of Saskatchewan. Considered by many to be the leading authority on Somerset Maugham, he is the author of several books, including W. Somerset Maugham and the Quest for Freedom, and Willie, The Life of W. Somerset Maugham. I'll now turn things over to Robert. Please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much to McNally Robinson for putting on this evening. And particularly thank you for all of you coming out to hear a very old guy talking about old movies. And maybe we can have a conversation about old movies later on. Somerset Maugham, most of you know, was one of the most prolific, certainly one of the most popular and most versatile authors of the 20th century. He wrote about 20 novels, some of which are very, very fine novels of Human Bondage, The Razor's Edge, The Painted Veil, Theatre, The Moon and Sixpence. But 20 novels. He wrote 32 plays. A couple of them are classic plays. The Constant Wife still is put on in places, and The Circle, which is highly regarded. From about 1908 to 1935, he was one of the major playwrights on both sides of the Atlantic, in London, Paris, and New York. And he also wrote more than 100 short stories. And some of those short stories you'll be familiar with. They're classic ones. Rain, story of Sadie Thompson, the hooker who encounters the missionary, and the missionary comes as a result to a bad end because of that. And then The Letter, a very famous story based on a true story of a woman in the southeast part of the world in the early colonial days on a rubber plantation who murders her lover and then gets off. And it was based on a true story. Maugham made into a short story. So he was extraordinarily versatile, and it was inevitable that he would be drawn to the new art form that was forming in the beginning of the 20th century, which was the feature film. The film is by far the newest of the major art forms. If you think back to stories, narratives, paintings, music, dance, and everything, which is centuries old. And film started up right around the turn of the 20th century and exploded as an industry around 1910, 1915, and thereafter. And it was almost like a gold rush of people going to California to try to make their fortune making films and acting in films and so on. And you know, one of the golden ages of film were the silent films made in the 1920s up until 1929. Some people still think that the silent film is the purest form of film and not contaminated by words, so strictly by everything being expressed by movement and so on. Well, inevitably, the film industry wanted to get Somerset Maugham works on the screen. And they wanted to for a number of reasons, one of which was simply the name, because in a new art form forming like film, the producers, the owners of the companies, wanted to give a legitimacy to the art form, that it was more than just a place where people could go in the evening and spend a dime or 15 cents in an evening and watch a short film or two and be entertained. They wanted to make it appear like it really was a fine art form. And if you could attach the name of authors that were well known for their written works, or playwrights who were known, even known in small towns by newspapers and other words, that in New York or in London or in Paris, these people were major playwrights. And so Somerset Maugham's name at the top of a billboard for a movie would draw a lot of people in. I think at one stage he was rather like King is today. One of those writers where people will go to the movie because they see his name there and they know what they're going to get. But Maugham was like that, and so for one thing that the film industry was doing was simply buying his name. They bought the rights to one of his works and put it on, then they had his name there. And there was a film put on in the 1930s where the actor, well-known actor, his name was below Somerset Maugham. Maugham's name was at the top. Now, the interesting thing is the film industry wanted Maugham to write for the screen, not just using his works, but to write screenplays. And they did this in a wide way, not just with Maugham, but with other writers. But Jesse Lasky at one of the companies and Samuel Goldwyn at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer actually went to Europe on headhunting trips to find writers, Arnold Bennett, for instance, Edward Knobloch, and others, and Maugham was one of them, that they could sign up so that they could say, we have this stable of great writers writing for us, and that they would produce new works. But the problem was, and it sort of still is today, is that most writers, even if they're exceptionally talented at writing novels and short stories in print, don't know how to write screenplays. There are very few examples of great writers who are also excellent screenwriters. When you think about F. Scott Fitzgerald, went to Hollywood and was a flop as a screenwriter. Faulkner was there, hated the whole experience, but wasn't particularly good at it. There are only a few writers I can think of who were able to be good screenwriters. Graham Greene is one, wrote The Third Man, and a couple of others, and adapted some of his own work. That was very good. Eric Ambler was another, but most writers weren't very good because writing for the page and writing for the screen is a very, very different thing. Most scripts for movies are 95 pages long or so. The novel might be 500 pages, the story that is. But the screenplay is only 90-something, because you put down a line saying she walked out of the building and looked solemnly to her left and then got in the car and left. That you put that one line down and it'll take 10 minutes, depending on what the actress decides she should be looking like, what the director decides the scene, should it be drawn out, should it be a long, prolonged thing, and so on. And then you get the lighting people saying, well, we've got to do it from this angle and that angle. So it's a whole different thing. And a lot of writers tried to be screenwriters and failed. There were some hilarious stories of them. One screenwriter was writing a script for it, and at one point in it, he said, "Words fail to describe what happened next." So it was left to the director and the cast and everything to figure out what did happen. There's another one who put in at one point, it was not by chance that they ended up in that cabin in the mountains. Well, it had to be more than by chance if you're actually making the movie. And then Samuel Goldwyn decided to bring in famous writers. And Maurice Maeterlinck, the Belgian novelist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, he was one that Goldwyn persuaded to come to Hollywood. Now, Maeterlinck had written a book called The Life of the Bee, which was actually about bees, the insect, but it was a kind of a fantasy and had a lot to do with the human condition and about humans and things of that sort. So it was a serious kind of thing. And Goldwyn set him up in Hollywood in a very luxurious hotel and said, "Write me a script." So a few weeks later, Maeterlinck came in with a script, handed it to Goldwyn. Goldwyn was delighted. And then he went in his office. And the story is that 10 or 15 minutes later, he burst out of the office and said, "What the hell? The hero of this picture is a bee." So much for that. So there were and Somerset Maugham himself was commissioned to write as early as 1918 by Jesse Lasky to write some screenplays, and found he couldn't do it. And then later on, in 1944 and 1945, when Warner Brothers were going to make the film version of The Razor's Edge. The Razor's Edge had come out a year earlier or so and had done very, very well. And the studio decided to make a movie about it. And it was a serious book. I mean, it was about a young man, very much a feeling of post-Second World War life, where he's trying to find meaning in life beyond the American capitalist system. Instead of just going into business, making your money, having a family and a big house and a car, and he wanted to think life had more than that. So he goes on this spiritual search and ends up in India in an ashram and becomes very spiritual. And at the end of the novel, he ends up just being a taxi driver in New York City, but content with his life because he's finally found some purpose in it. Well, it was Darryl Zanuck who wanted to make the movie about it. And George Cukor, Maugham's friend, was going to be the director. And Cukor said, "We got to get Maugham to write the actual screenplay himself. I mean, get the actual guy to do it." Well, Maugham wrote a screenplay, and then Zanuck decided there wasn't enough action in it. He needed he wanted an action hero in it. So they scrapped it and just handed the whole project over to one of their company screenwriters, and that was it. And the Maugham screenplay still exists in an archive in the United States, and you can see it. And Cukor eventually got replaced as a director for the film, but Cukor said, this was a very thoughtful script, but the film version is very good, but it might have been better. But it was an example of where Maugham really put his heart into it, but couldn't write for the screen. Now, even though Maugham himself couldn't master the art of screenwriting, Hollywood really wanted his material. And the reason they wanted his material, there were two or three things about it. One of which were the plots. Maugham was a master storyteller. As he always said, he sort of got back to people sitting around in a cave centuries ago telling stories, and he was a storyteller. But he also was not a modernist writer. He was not occupied so much with the interior thought process, a stream of consciousness of people. He described them from the outside. He was trained as a medical doctor, so he was able to study people and look at their facial expressions, their color tone, everything about them, the way they moved and so on. And like doctors do, make suppositions about what's going on inside by what they can see in front of them. In other words, diagnosing them. And so he described his characters. And Bette Davis, who appeared in 2 of his movies, said it was so easy to act the parts because she said, Mom laid it all out on the page. He described the character so vividly that I just had to embody it. Now, she was underplaying her part in it because she was a superb actress. But they liked the plots. The characters were easily translated to the screen. The problem was that Mom's plots didn't end the way Hollywood wanted plots to end. Many, many times in Mom's stories, the murderer gets away with it, or the person who has been up to skullduggery does not get punished, or the story just ends up unhappily because life is often like that. It doesn't always end up warmly. But Hollywood didn't like those kind of movies. They thought the ordinary person in Topeka or Moose Jaw is going to want to have something where they come out of the theater feeling happy and warm. So no, let's not have an Ibsen play or anything like that. We want something warm. William Dean Howells, the American writer, summed it all up. He said, what the American public wants is tragedy with a happy ending. And if you ever want an example of that, it's that travesty of an ending of that movie, It's a Wonderful Life, where after providing a very serious and thoughtful analysis of somebody's life and the way it can be worthwhile, even without all the successes, it ends up magically at the end, somehow at Christmas time, the really feel-good time, snow gently falling down, not blowing in like it often does here, gently falling down. And all the townspeople show up at the hero's house. He's reconciled with his family. He wanted to die, now he wants to be back with his family. And they're all singing Christmas carols, and the people have all brought money, and they all live happily ever after. That epitomized it. And so almost all of Mom's plots were changed, and he was not satisfied with very many of the movies that were made of his works for that reason. And he often said, if they don't like my plots, why did they buy them? If they liked their own plot better, why didn't they just keep them? Of course, he also liked the money that he got because he made a lot of money because not only when a company takes out an option on a work, pays $150,000 for the 5-year rights to a certain work. If they don't produce it in 5 years, the author keeps the money, and then the rights revert to the author, and they can sell them to somebody else. Or if they make the movie and the author gets cut, and they make quite a bit of money. Mom made a lot of money out of these movies, although most of them he didn't like. I'll just give you a couple of examples of what I consider extreme changes to Mom's plots. One of which is the 1940 version of The Letter with Bette Davis, which is, I think, maybe the best film, or one of the very best films made about Mom's works. It still stands up really well. You see it on TV, periodic still, especially on Turner Classics. And it's about the woman who kills her lover. She's had this lover. Her husband is a big, burly, distant kind of rubber plantation manager. And she has this lover, and she finds out that he is also involved with an Oriental woman, an Asiatic woman, sorry. And that really offends her. I mean, there's quite a bit of racism in it, that he would have that kind of lover. And so she kills him. She plugs him full of holes, which Bette Davis in the movie does perfectly, as you might expect, with seeming joy. 6 bullets into this guy. Anyways, there's a letter that incriminates her, and she and her lawyer contrive to buy the letter from somebody who's got it, and she escapes justice. And in Mom's story, it's really quite awful at the end, because she gets acquitted, even though she's guilty. She gets acquitted, and then she joins the other women in the colony. They're having a tea party or something, and she goes back to being a very polite, very genteel British woman in the colonies. And yet you know that she's been capable of adultery and very passionate behavior and murder, and she gets away with it. Well, that's Mom's story, and Mom thought, well, people do get away with these things. Well, life has people who escape it. But in the film, and they make the film very faithfully to the story, except the end, and to escape the censorship that was in the place at the time. You could not, one of the rules of Hollywood up until the 70s or 1980s is you could not show criminals getting away with their crime. They could not benefit from their crime. People who committed adultery could not benefit or be happy with that. It always had to end badly. And in this case, the woman got away with it. But so they added an ending to it where Bette Davis admits that she's been unfaithful, and her husband then goes off, and he might, keep the marriage going, or he might not. We don't know. But then she knows that out in the garden, the Eurasian mistress of her lover, whom she's killed, is lurking with a dagger. And we've seen the dagger before. And she walks out, she half knows what's going to happen. And the woman stabs her and kills her. So justice is seen to be done. She committed murder, so now she's dead as a result. But then you've got the problem is, well, what about this woman who just killed her? So then immediately, for some reason, there's 2 cops who've been hanging around with this woman. And they just, the last thing you see is they grab the Eurasian woman, take her off. So she's going to go to prison or maybe be hung for it. So all the criminals are going to die. And that's how that ended. And I mean, it's preposterous. The director, William Wyler, fine director, hated that ending tacked on, but there was what was called the Hayes Office, the censorship bureau, which had Hollywood in its grip from the early 20s until about 1967, where, I mean, you couldn't, in the 1930s, you could not show somebody going into the bathroom to brush their teeth and there'd be a toilet over there. You would never see, I would defy you to find a scene in which there's a toilet in a Hollywood movie of the 1930s. It was considered, some people just didn't do anything except wash the face and put it in the there was that kind of rigid censorship. And the other example of this is a movie that Mom did really like, and that's the film version of The Moon and Sixpence with George Sanders, which was done about 1942. And this is the movie, the story, the novel, based on the story of Paul Gauguin, the French painter, who the legend is, there's some truth to it, but that he abandoned in midlife, in his 40s, abandoned his wife and children because he wanted to become a painter. And so he went off and abandoned them completely. And in Mom's novel, he not only does that, but he does some really awful things in the name of art. Mom was really trying to explore what George Bernard Shaw in The Doctor's Dilemma and other people were looking at is what are the responsibilities of artists to be decent human beings, and how much can we put up with antisocial behavior from artists, actors, and film people and painters and so on. if the result is great art. And this is the question, because in the novel, Strickland, the man who's based on Gauguin, produces great art, absolutely stunning paintings, but he's an absolute blackguard, really, really quite nasty. But Hollywood filmed it exactly the way Mom wrote it. So you'd think, wow, this is a breakthrough. They're actually showing someone who had a long life. He dies at the end of leprosy, as did Gauguin, but he had a long life and he produced some great art. You say, well, that's okay, except the Hayes office, the censorship body, forced on the film studio, and they were pushed by a thing called the Catholic Legion of Decency, which had a huge power in the United States in the 30s and 40s over the film industry. And they were even worse in some ways than the Hayes office in terms of how strict they were about what they wanted to see on the screen. And so they forced the studio to put this on the screen. At the beginning of the movie, before the movie starts, you see this legend on the screen. It says, "This is the story of Charles Strickland, the painter, whose career has created so much discussion. It is not our purpose to defend him." Okay, that's fair enough. But then they go on for 90 minutes or so to show you a guy who creates some tremendous art and does a whole lot of other things. And you get enthralled with him. The narrator telling the story becomes totally enthralled by him, as do the audience in the theater. But the studio says, we're not going to defend him. And then when the movie was over, at the end, when the credits were rolling at the end, they also put on the screen, they said, "Such was Strickland. He trod roughshod over his obligations as husband and father, over the rights and sensibilities of those who befriended him. Neither the skill of his brush nor the beauty of his canvas could hide the ugliness of his life, an ugliness which finally destroyed him." In other words, basically saying, don't do this at home. You've just seen this, but we don't endorse it, and we hope nobody will behave that way. I mean, in a lot of cuts that you now see on television, they've eliminated those, but not all of them, because I did see Ron Turner a couple of years ago, those things being flashed there. But these are the things that happened, and over and over again, the endings. Now, in more recent years, of course, the grip of censorship has been lessened considerably. So studios have a lot more freedom to do things. One other example I'll give you of the hold that the censorship body had was one of his very finest novels is Cakes and Ale, came out in about 1930. And many people think it's his best novel. But Human Bondage is perhaps his most important one, because it's an autobiographical Bildungsroman about maturity, coming to maturity, and finding a philosophy in your life by which you can live. So it's got all kinds of important themes. Cakes and Ale is a more satiric work, but it has in it one of the most delightful female characters in 20th century fiction, a young woman called Rosie Gann. And the story is about a famous English author who has died. Some people think Mom was basing it on Thomas Hardy. Maybe he wasn't, maybe it didn't matter. But the famous author has died, and his family are trying to write a sanitized biography of him. And in his earlier life, he's had an affair with Rosie, this young woman, and they want to expunge that from any of the history. So there's a lot of Mom's having a lot of fun with trying to what is truth, and how do we hide it, or how do we find it, or whatever. But Rosie is a wonderful character. She is promiscuous, to use that term. She has many relationships with men. They come and they go. But she's a free spirit. She's wonderful. She's kind. She's loving. She just has a lot of relationships with men, sexual relationships. They come and go, and she refuses to be owned by anybody. So at one point, the narrator who was involved with her is very unhappy because she's gone with some other guy. And she said, well, you have to take me as I am. That's it. Wonderful character. Well, Hollywood made movie versions of all of Norm's major novels and many of the other ones that were treated that important. They never made a film of Cakes and Ale. To this day, there's no feature film about Cakes and Ale. And the reason was because of the central figure, Rosie. She is the heart of the novel. She's what makes the novel really go. But if you sanitize her, to use that word, make her just a good time girl rather than what she is. I mean, you rob the whole thing of what the whole story is about. And they could never, film companies could never come up with a script that somehow presented her as a unique and vibrant life force figure that would get by the censors, because you had to cut out really what she was. So it hasn't been made yet. I keep hoping that some studio will decide it's not too late, that you could still do it. And I keep thinking Margot Robbie playing a different role from Barbie by a long shot would be a marvelous figure. But that was blocked, always blocked. And maybe we'll see it one day. Well, there's so many other things I could say, but I would rather leave it if there are any questions. I'll after we're finished this whole thing, I'll stick around. I would like to, anybody wants to talk further about Mom or the film industry or anything, I'm happy to talk about it. But I'm wondering if there are questions now. Dave?
Was Somerset Maugham a movie buff? Did he like the movies the way he loved the theater?
The question is whether Maugham was a movie buff himself. He did see some films, but he in his correspondence and other things, I never saw very many times where he talked about a particular film that he'd seen or that had moved him. He was a very professional author and very conscious of his royalties and his book sales and sales of rights to things. And he did go to a lot of plays of other people because he was an active playwright. But I don't recall many times when he commented at all about any other film.
Was he alive when the Bill Murray version of Razor's Edge came up? And did he ever say anything? Did he like it, or was he a fan of it?
No. Mom died in 1965.
Okay,
so he who knows what he would have said about the Bill. This was the Bill Murray version, which came out in the early 80s, and it's hilarious. It's so far from. There's more Bill Murray in it, let's say, than there is Somerset Maugham. And Murray wanted to do a serious movie. I mean, he wanted to do it badly enough that he kind of browbeat the studio because they wanted to make a movie called Ghostbusters. And he wanted to do this one, so he said, okay, I'll do Ghostbusters if you'll finance my version of the Razor's Edge. Somebody had given him the Razor's Edge, and he said, that's me. I know exactly what Larry Darrell, the hero in it, I know what he's feeling. I know exactly. So then he made the movie. But I mean, in the movie, he can't resist doing the Saturday Night Live Bill Murray stuff. There's a scene where he's talking to his, at the very beginning of the movie, at a garden party, and there's a swimming pool, and he's in the swimming pool. And his girlfriend, Isabel, is sitting, and he wants to tell her that he's not going to join her father's company the way she wanted him to be a businessman. He's going to go off to Europe and find himself. That's what he's saying. I want to find myself. And so he comes out of the swimming pool, but he can't resist when he comes out of the swimming pool pretending he's a seal. So he comes up on the side of the pool and he flops out of the water like he's a seal. And it's totally gratuitous, but it's Bill Murray can't. And then there's another scene where he's off in Nepal when he goes off to go to an ashram and study Eastern mysticism. And there are women in the streets of this Nepalese town selling fruit and vegetables. And he starts clowning around with them. Like he grabs one of their grapefruits or whatever it is and starts flipping it up in the air and everything, on his way to seek spiritual salvation. Now Murray said later, well, you can find spiritual salvation and still be funny, but not when that becomes the main thing. So the earlier version with Tyrone Power and others is still the best version. It's a wonderful version, by the way. You see it periodically again on Turner Classic shows it a lot. Tyrone Power plays Larry Darrell, the young man. Gene Tierney, luminous Gene Tierney, plays Isabel, his girlfriend, and Anne Baxter plays a tragic friend. And Anne Baxter got an Oscar Best Supporting Actress for that role. But the movie's stolen in a way by Clifton Webb, who played Elliot Templeton, who is he's not said to be gay, but clearly is in the film. A very aristocratic man with expensive taste, but also aesthetic tastes and love of art and things like that. And Clifton Webb was just perfect for that. In fact, when the novel came out, people told Webb, "You got to make this. When they make the movie, you got to be Elliot Templeton because it's you." And there's a great scene near the end where he's a snob. This is another thing about Elliot Templeton. He's a huge snob and he's very hurt. He's dying and he's on the Riviera and he's very hurt because there's a huge glamorous party being put on by a woman called Princess Nova Mali. And he doesn't get an invitation. And for him, this is the ultimate insult, the ultimate terrible thing. You don't get invited to the big party of the year. And so his friends concoct a phony invitation. And you see this scene where they bring this fake invitation. And he's so happy, so delighted to see that, yes, indeed, there was a slip, there was a mistake. The mail didn't get delivered, but here it is, an invitation to the big party. And then with great glee, he says, leaning back on his pillow at the end, please tell Princess Nova Mali that Mr. Elliot Templeton regrets that he will not be able to attend the party because he has a previous engagement with his maker. And it's all done very well, but it's a fine movie. Yeah, Lisa.
As you were talking about mom making money and so forth, I started thinking about films now and then. I just read an article in the newspaper about all the money you have to put in promotion to get nominated for an Academy Award. And I realized, I know nothing about marketing and all these things. But nowadays, when there's a film based on a book, then you get the version of the book with a picture of the film on it. And if you're me, you don't buy that version because you want a different, so sales of Jane Austen or I don't know, Yann Martel, the movies, Life of Pi. You know, there's book sales. Did Mom make money from further book sales when people saw the film? Did they buy the book? Did publishers?
Oh,
There probably wasn't that kind of maybe but relationship between publishing companies and movies then, or
you'd have to, well, I'm not sure how you prove it.
yeah.
I mean, there are archives in Los Angeles and other university archives of the contracts with Mom, the publishing and the theater and the film. You might find some information there, but I think more it's just a kind of an educated guess. And I would say that yes, he probably benefited not just from the royalties from the film itself, but for the increased sales. Because sometimes, you know, there is really a spark. People see the movie, then they want to read the book. You know, that leads to another question. Always, from the time I was very young, whenever there was a film adaptation of a favorite book of mine, I was always excited. Like I always thought, wow, I want to see what the movie version is like. And then recently, when I was working on this book, I thought, why? You know, why? If you read a great novel, why does it have to be filmed? And some film critics say, you know, if you're looking at the film and you're disappointed because it doesn't represent the book as you understand it, if you really wanted to relive the experience, just go back and read the book again. But we all somehow there's even a feeling, I think, and we all kind of share it, is that the book is not really validated until somebody makes a movie about it. You know, like it did, like it exists in some kind of limbo. And so the big question about film adaptation, as opposed to writing directly for the screen, is how do you judge the thing? I come from the point of view, and I had to resist very much when I was writing the book, of being curious about this and saying, well, that's not what Somerset Maugham wrote. You've changed it. But, you know, I think a lot of times if you are a writer and you sell your rights, you just have to say, okay, whatever the studio is going to do with it, it's not mine anymore. I sold the rights to it. And, you know, I don't think most movies of great books are as good as the books themselves. I think the book is better than some, but there are some exceptions to that. I mean, Death in Venice, for instance, it's a superb movie with Dirk Bogarde and the Mahler music in it. I would venture to say that's better than the written story. The Bridges of Madison County, I've never read the novel, but I've been told it's not a very good novel, but it was made into a very, very good movie, you know, with Robert Redford and Meryl Streep. And one could argue The Godfather as a film, much better than the novel was written. So there are times when films are better, but it is an odd thing that we seem to think everything has to be translated to the screen. Whereas some of the greatest movies are the ones where the screenplay is written for the screen, you know, just directly.
You know, I think that the female character in Capote's Breakfast at Tiffany's, Holly Golightly, I think is her name, is very much like Rosie.
Yeah, and
she leads a wild bohemian lifestyle. It's never shown, but it's always implied.
yeah, but it's in my
Tell us what the question was, please.
Oh, it was about Holly Golightly, the character in Breakfast at Tiffany's, the Truman Capote story, which was made into the film. Now, I have to confess, I didn't read the original story, But I understand that she was far more shown and talked about as being a hooker than you ever get the idea of in the film. You know, as I say, I'm speaking with a bit of ignorance, but most people I've seen writing film histories have always said, no, kind of sweet-natured Audrey Hepburn you see on the screen is far cry from the character that Capote actually put on the page. But I don't know whether that answers. But yeah, again, they could have tried. I suppose they could have tried with Cakes and Ale to do the same thing. But to me, it would have been a pale version of the character that the mom put on the page. Tony, you?
Yeah. No, most of us know that you're the foremost authority on Somerset Maugham, but I'm wondering, did you have any challenges when you were researching this book, or did you just sit down on a Saturday and it was just all there?
Well, I was lucky, and I have to admit this, and some of my friends will want to kill me for this, but I was very much helped by the internet, because there are now a lot of movie archives that are now online, and my wife Holly, who is an expert on old silent film posters, but old film posters, put me onto a whole lot of old movie magazines from as early as 1915, but certainly in the 1920s, fan magazines, and then professional magazines put out for theater managers all across North America to tell them what movies are coming out and how they should promote the movies and reviewed the things and so on. And I was able to just sit at home, you know, a mile and a half from here in my room and work away and go to those kind of archives. And, you know, 25 years ago, I would have had to go to Washington, maybe to the Library of Congress, or go to Los Angeles and sit for weeks and weeks. In fact, I would never have been able to find all the stuff I found, because a lot of these movie magazines now, they have word searches and so on. So I was able to do that. But I had been collecting material for 20 some years, or 25 years, with the idea that I eventually might do a book about Maugham film adaptations. So I was accumulating all kinds of material. I did write an article for a scholarly journal back in the 80s or so about film adaptation. I had a lot of material, but I found it, and how could you complain about some of your researchers sitting watching old movies? Sitting there watching Bette Davis in a Human Bondage or something else, or Gene Eagles in The Letter, things like that. And then writing about it, I find writing really hard work. And this was easier. Now, what I didn't like, and I'm going to try to avoid for quite a while, was endnotes, footnotes, bibliography, illustrations, and all that kind of stuff. That was good work, but it came out to be in the University of Wisconsin Press did a superb job. They are probably the best press in the world for film studies, film analysis. So this book my book is in a series called Wisconsin Film Studies, and I'm very, very pleased about that. But they put me through my paces in the copy editing stage, and so on. I felt like a grad student again, learning things. But it was all to make it as error-free as you could. Yeah.
What drew you to like, what was your impetus to study him?
What drew me to him?
Yes.
Oh, that goes way back to when I did my BA and MA here at the U of S, and then I wanted to do a doctoral degree and was looking around for something to work on, and I realized that Somerset Maugham had been ignored by the academic world. Most academic people thought he was just a middle brow writer, not worth writing about. And I was told, for instance, that no point in applying to Oxford or Cambridge. They won't consider Maugham worthy of study. So, they'll turn you down right away. So I didn't even try. I went to Leeds University, which was far more open to more modern things. And I did my doctoral dissertation on Maugham. It got published as a book. And then I followed that up with a biography in 1989, full-scale biography of Maugham, and then a number of other articles. And I never tired. Some people, when they do their doctoral work on an author intensively, you're reading it over and over, you get sick of them. You never want to see it again. I can pick up a Maugham story today, and I still enjoy it. I get tired of it. Maybe I have a limited range of what it is, but I still enjoy it. So yeah. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. I see friends I haven't seen for quite a while out there, and other people. So I'm very grateful for you to come out, and I'm going to stick around if you want to talk further or ask questions further. I'm happy, as Holly will know, we're talking at length about movies and about Somerset Maugham. Thank you.